Hi, everyone, and welcome to Pagan's Passionate People. Today, I am talking with my dear friend, Jeffrey Weissman. But before we get to the interview, I have to tell you that you must like, follow, and subscribe. Help us build our community as I talk to storytellers. We share movies, books, films, all that here on our Jerome P. Create. So make sure you like, follow. Also, today's episode is sponsored by Pagan Scary Stories Volume 1, which is now on Audible. I'll put the link in our bio. So go and get that. And you also can get a 3-month trial for Audible through this link. So go ahead and grab that as well. But without further ado, here's our intro, and we'll go straight into our non-stop interview with Jeffrey Weissman.
Passion, purpose, perspective, perseverance. Long ago, the four passions thrived in harmony. Then, everything changed when self-doubt, worry, fear, and societal pressures attacked. Only the passionate people, masters of the 4 Ps, could withstand the onslaught. But when doubts loomed darkest, they rose united, led by drive, and became Pagan's passionate people. 100 challenges passed, and the passionate people emerged as champions, fueled by their inner fire. With their collective strength, they can change the world. This is Pagan's Passionate People. And here's your host, Robert Jerome Pagan.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back. As you know, this podcast is sponsored by Pagan Scary Stories, the audiobook, which you can get now on Amazon Audible, and on Apple. Yeah, go find it. Yeah, the ad just told you where to look for it. But today I'm excited because I am here with one of my passionate people, and that is Jeffrey Weissman. I'm going to bring him out here. Jeffrey, how are you doing?
I'm here. I'm happy to be here. I'm gonna build up my passion.
Yeah, perfect. So now me and Jeffrey there's a lot of things that are very interesting, and some of the things Jeffrey won't even know on why I'm connected to him and why he's one of my passionate people. And we'll get into that in our second part. But what I like to do first is, of course, I like to talk about the person, nature and nurture, where you came from, where your passions came from. And for those of you who don't know Jeffrey, you do. You do, because everyone's seen Back to the Futures 2 and 3. And, of course, he was George in those films. And we're actually going to talk a little bit about that, because that kind of goes in with the whole AI thing, that lawsuit and everything, and kind of like that kind of goes into what a lot of actors are dealing with today. And that was a huge part of not only the film industry, but I also think in a lot of ways the film industry and the acting industry kind of was really wrong to you in many ways. And so I get to talk about that a little bit later as well, because that's just who I am. But first, Jeffrey, let's talk about you. When you were younger, and I always like to say this, and some people have memories, some people don't. Let's talk about how you were when you grew up. Where did you grow up? What were those memories from? Like, yep, we're going to be talking about that soon.
Yeah, I just so people have some reference. If you've seen Back to the Future 2 and 3, that's me in parts 2 and 3. Okay, yeah, I was born at a very early age.
Of zero, or four.
My family always thought I was kind of a born ham. I was always passionate about just life in general from the go-get. I remember growing up hearing stories about me sitting in my high chair, swearing at the dinner table. I started talking apparently at 10 months old, maybe earlier, 8 months. And one night at the dinner table, I said shit. And now for a baby to say shit in 1960 or 59, whatever it was pretty shocking. And so everyone dropped their fork and went, Jeffrey, where did you learn that? How could you? And I said my brother's name, Mikey. And my brother said, no, I wouldn't. What? And then I said, no, Mikey, you know I liar, or something like this. So this kind of needing to be center of attention, I think probably started early on, and in grade school was a bit of the class clown, and I was able though to channel my performance leanings into like history class. I would take whatever period we were studying and make it into a news broadcast live from ancient Egypt. Let's go now to the pharaohs. Whatever I could do to kind of channel my hamminess. I didn't really start taking my acting seriously until, I guess, I would see kids on TV or in films, and I wanted to do that. I remember I had a babysitter who actually took me to my dad's club. My dad used to manage and own private bridge and backgammon clubs in Beverly Hills and Hollywood. And my babysitter kind of freaked out because my dad introduced her to Omar Sharif from Dr. Zhivago and other great films. Yeah. And she kind of flipped. And then later on, we actually went to a movie that had just premiered that week that he co-starred in. And I saw her freak out again. And I was like, I was very fond of that babysitter. And, here's a way I can get attention by becoming an actor. But my parents didn't want me to go into acting. I was very passionate about wanting to do it. They wouldn't allow it. They stay on your studies, boy. And so I just acted mainly in school, and then community theater, children's theater. I did a show at UCLA when I was young. A director that had used me in children's theater brought me into UCLA to play little chap in Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, with Joyce DeWitt from Three's Company playing my mom years before she got that role. But it was really great to be kind of thrust into the adult world of acting there.
Yeah. So now, Mike, so that community theater, huge. And I love community theater. I mean, I ran community theater for 15 years. But like, I also think it's what community theater was, even when I was running it, is different than what it is now. Completely different, especially in California, where you are. AB5 kind of killed a lot of aspects of.
Well, and the pandemic has closed. In the Bay Area alone, about 15 theaters have shut their doors.
But when you were young, what would you say? What was the major impact of community theater on you, and maybe what was one of your favorite roles in community theater?
Well, once again, it provided me a platform to get into working with adults. I, in school, worked with my peers from 7th, 8th, 9th grade to high school, 10th and 12th through 12th. But once I got out into, say, the community theater, I worked in one show with a lot of folk who came out of the theater department of Los Angeles City College.
Okay.
Bruce Kimmel took over the directing when Doug Nye, I was actually in a cast that mutinied against a director, which is never a fun thing. But nonetheless, Bruce Kimmel was pretty accomplished, prolific musicologist, writing scores. And if you look him up, you'll see that his first movie, the first nudie musical with Cindy Williams and Diana Canova. Diana Canova was in the show I was in. And I was, kind of taken under wing by these adults when I wasn't on stage and mentored. And that to me was everything. I remember as a kid finding where TV shows were shooting in my neighborhood. I remember the FBI, Efren Zimbalist Jr. show, was shooting in my neighborhood. And I walked on the set because there was no guard. And I recognized the guest star, Monty Markham, from a TV show called The Second 100 Years. And he liked that I, a kid, said, "Oh, The Second 100 Years." And he was like, he recognized me. That's nice. And I had just graduated, I think it was the 5th grade. And I had my report card, and this character actor said, "Is that your report card? Let me see it, kid." Oh, that's good. You got an A in English, a B in history. What's this D in math? how are you going to know you want to be an actor? Which I had told him. How are you going to know if your agent's screwing you or not? You got to do better in math. You know, it was.
That to me like is the quintessential 60s. The actor going, how do you know if the agent's gonna screw you or not?
Oh, you froze.
Oh no, am I back?
Yeah, well,
perfect. No, but like that's like the 60s to me. Like all like that whole that late 50s, early 60s film is like actors wondering if they're going to be screwed by the studio.
Oh yeah, well, it was the monopolies were broken up around that early 60s time, and the contract players started to become a thing of history. And I was very fortunate in that when I meet people like uh, uh, John Barrymore II, who was a contract player, I had long talks with him, and other actors that I knew that came from the old system, Phyllis Coates and such. I pull these stories out and see what kind of life it was, and it was very much a different mindset. And that 60s was obviously a transition with the booming of television work. A lot of film people made that transition into TV, and then film had new, fresh things going on. I remember, Blazing Saddles, when that came out, it was like, wow, Mel Brooks, fantastic. What a silly, fun romp this is, which he could never do that. A lot of those jokes now that were in that film. But nonetheless, I had heard, and I think I had just gone into the 10th grade, 74, that he was shooting something in my neighborhood. And so instead of taking the bus home, I walked through the Santa Monica Mall and started seeing people in Victorian wear. I was like, this must be where the shoot is. And I saw one gentleman whose mustache was flapping.
Yeah.
I said, sir, excuse me, your mustache is coming out. He goes, oh, is it? Who are you? And I said, I'm an actor. He goes, really? What have you done? And I started listing my shows at school, Merchant of Venice and As You Like It and Dark of the Moon and on and on. And he said, really? You want to meet Mel? And I said, yes. And he took me by the hand, and we went to the Mayfair Music Hall where they were shooting the Puttin' on the Ritz number.
Mm-hmm.
First person I saw was Peter Boyle in the creature makeup with these beautiful shades of green. I thought, this is going to look incredible. I was a little disappointed to see it was in black and white, but nonetheless. And then the next person I met was Marty Feldman, who carried a man bag, who wore he was in his street clothes, and he had a beret and a man bag on. And I, have come kind of full circle in that I carry a man bag now, and I got to play Igor on stage a few years ago in the
Young Frankenstein the musical.
Yeah,
I got to see you in that, and you were great. You were great. Yeah,
it was really difficult for me because I was in 12 numbers, and I needed to tap dance, of course, in the Putting on the Ritz number. I hadn't tap danced since 81 while I was at ACT, I think it was. And I literally threw my back out while rehearsing. And it was a real challenge to keep up, as it were. But I got it. Yeah, I got a nomination for a Bay Area Critics Award for that performance. Thank you very much. I'm glad you saw it.
Yeah, no, the whole production was really good. But I went and saw that because that was actually around the time that I was doing Carnival Fantastico.
Oh, yes.
That was around the time as Carnival Fantastico. So I had remembered Molly was like, you need to go check out this guy. I think he'd be great for Puccinella, for the festival. And so I remember watching you, and I was like, oh yeah, like, hello. Like, and then at that time, we'll talk about that in a second. But so high school, you're in 10th grade, you meet Mel Brooks, you're in this place of like, you're also in LA, you're in Hollywood, so you're able to be around that area.
But I can't work professionally. I
can't work professionally.
Supported, so I kind of my older brother and sister rebelled a bit. They were in high school during the sexual revolution and the heavy drug scene starting up, and Summer of Love and all that. And so my other sister was just under a year older than I. She and I kind of were bad, and would sneak out of the house after the parents went to bed and go party and act out David Bowie albums with our friends drinking champagne, and then get back home before 5 a.m. so we could get up and go to school.
Yeah.
You know, it was a very strange time there, you know, being in theater. There was a lot of acceptance of people not necessarily criticizing their sexuality or anything, and yet I was in a toxic environment in the early 70s there in Santa Monica. There were several different factions of racism going on. The surfers against the valleys. Those Dogtown boys were pretty obnoxious. They were very talented on their boards and stuff, but they threw their weight around, and there was a lot of drug intake and a lot of partying, and a thing on Friday nights and Saturday nights where they go into the Santa Monica Pier and fag bop, where they beat up gays who were cruising. You know, so there was a lot of terrible shit going down. The Crips and the Bloods were having their fights. It was a very strange time. There was a lot of racism against Latinos, the beaners they were called back then, mm-hmm. And it was especially harsh against gays. And I, not really caring about other people's sexuality so much, I made lots of friends who were either yet to come out or coming out in junior high and high school. And then I saw how very firsthand how they were passionate about their arts and expression. You know, the onslaught of glitter rock and glam, you know, really kind of opened the door from Bowie and Bolan and Mottley Hoople, you know, bands that celebrated, you know, letting your freak flag fly, combined with hippiness doing the same thing. You know, it was a really nice renaissance for expression, but it also exposed them to jocks and people who are insecure with sexuality being expressed. Yeah. And so I became kind of a passionate about making friends with these folk to try to, I don't know, soften the burden or even try to express parts of me that I had to stifle because of fear. And I got involved with a lot of people who got damaged, and some committed suicide. My best friend committed suicide when I was 15, and, you know, threw me through a tailspin. Luckily, I got accepted to an alternative school my last year of high school, where it was more of a family environment than a regimented school type of thing. And I was able to, when I had a falling out with my parents, I ran off to the Renaissance Fair and lived on the site and actually hitchhiked. Well, it was at 35 miles from Agoura to Santa Monica to go to school and back. You know, I have a lot of tales of, you know, being kind of abused by people giving me rides hitchhiking, you know, crossing boundaries. But then I have all these incredibly wonderful adventures. I don't know if you know the Agoura fair site down south, but there was a place we'd eat at called Wizen's. And one morning, Marcellus and Jay, a couple friends of mine who lived on Fairside as well, we went to Wizen's for breakfast before I was off to school. And there was Johnny Cash. Wow. Having breakfast by himself. I was like, oh my God, you guys, I have to go say thank you. Or something. And they went and got the table, and I went over and I said, excuse me, Mr. Cash, I just wanted to say thank you very much for the wonderful music and so on. He says, well, what's your name? And I said, Jeffrey. And he says, well, sit down, have breakfast with me. And I was like, I'm with my friends here, and so we'll bring them over. So you know, the three of us had breakfast with Johnny Cash, and he told stories. He was in town for his daughter's graduation from high school, and they ended up taking him to the fair site to give him a tour, which he liked apparently. And I missed that part because I had to go
to
school, and I was at the time playing Falstaff in Henry IV Part 2.
Okay.
And you know, trying to hold all this down. I have to flash forward in this story to give part two of it. I, in between film and TV work, started playing Stanley Laurel at Universal Studios, Laurel and Hardy.
Mm-hmm.
And they would loan us out for various special events, and they loaned us to the Country Music Awards to escort the winners out. And one year I was backstage at the Universal Amphitheater, and there was June and Johnny. And I went up to him when he had no one bugging him, and I said, "Mr. Cash, I just want to say hello. We had breakfast years ago in Agora." And he said, "Oh, I remember you, Jeffrey." I was like, "Really?" I said, "What do you think about Kathy Mattea and Clint Black and George Strait and Highway 101?" And he goes, "Oh, I don't know how many of them ever spent time in jail or dug a ditch, but I reckon they're all right." You know. Anyway.
So
I
that's amazing. Johnny Cash. The funny thing is, Johnny Cash has so many different fair relations, and like then Folsom Fair and Folsom Fair, like there's so much. Anyway, you're in high school. You have a falling out with your parents. You're in an alternative school, and you're now living on a fair site, which actually kind of helps me move into your next stage of life, which would be going into your adult career. And you actually, I would say there are a couple, Patrick Stewart's one of them. There are a couple major people from Agora and from Southern Fair and from Black Point. All those people who are watching who are like, I don't know what this is. Those are all different fair sites, original fair sites in Northern California and Southern California. Renaissance Fair, if you just go for the booze and drinking, used to be a lot different, and used to be a lot more cultural and had a lot more plays, and there's just a lot more. There was a lot more to it, and so you're now on the fair site, and back then, fair was like a mix of like Woodstock hippieism and theater arts and travelers, people who didn't have a home. Like, and so like if you kind of like went and lived and people were like, whoa, and you were like probably 17, 18.
Yeah, my original visit to fair in 73, I probably was, well, how old was I there? 13, 14? I'm going to say something that you hear time and again from fairies, people who just have been lifelong fair
Yes.
attendees or participants. As soon as I got there, I knew I was home.
Hmm.
I saw that here was celebration of history, recreating history, plays on stage, interactive, immersive theater in the streets, and play mixed in with arts and crafts.
Yes.
And it had all these elements that were just alive and also mischievous. There was lustiness. There was very open. There was a kissing bridge. There was soak a bloke and drench a wench. There was after hours. There were orgies. There were there were a lot of lovemaking going on and a lot of social interaction. A lot of people having a great time. There was a good deal of drugs, but I think more importantly for me, it was a place where I didn't feel inhibited to be me.
Mm.
And though I had to find a niche, and I did everything from learning swordplay and English country dance to commedia dell'arte to playing in court. I was in Burleigh's court as a groom. Then I went in and recreated the Montague Capulet sword fight as Benvolio at the Washer Well. I did a lot of different things over the years, rope plays, stage stuff, directed some. And so for me, it was magical in the creative sense. And then it was magical on the social scene because I had an older brother who influenced me heavily, who was I was fairly active sexually, and I oh, how am I going to live up to my older brother's standards, you know? And I had at one point in one fair, I think I had 6 different relationships going on simultaneously until one gal came to me who said, "Oh, you gave me a social disease." I was like, "What?" And so naturally, I had to tell these 5 other girls that they needed to get checked out, and I went and got checked out, and I didn't have anything. But man, I was dropped like a bomb.
Yeah, no. The funny thing is I akin fair in the early days to what festival culture is today. Like the
Very
Coachella.
much. I think you're onto it. A lot of people have always said like Burning Man felt like fair after hours. That the big raves and so on and so forth were very much like our night shows and the parties hopping that you could do. So in a way, it more than likely gave birth or sparked and influenced a lot of the things that we have.
Yeah, and well, I mean, yes, and if you break down to it, the Dickens Fair, there's so much that came out of that Agora Fair. There's so much, and not only just here in America. Like people don't realize that in Europe they do Western fairs, which were inspired by us doing fairs about them. So they're like that culture and then they have the SCA, the Society of Creative Anachronism, that came out of Agora, and there's so much that was given to the acting world and to the art world from Renaissance fairs that people don't realize. They don't realize that a lot of people and a lot of famous people started out in those fairs.
Oh
Now,
yeah.
you in fair, like you said, you did many, 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 many different things. But one of the things that I would say is you are probably one of the most quintessential character actors that came out of a fair, with your ability to jump back and forth from so many different characters, which then align to you having such a prevalent film character actor career. Do you think that the training or the ability of doing with Inside Fair did help you when it came to learning in film, or
I definitely feel that I got from fair a lot of exercise. I have a lot of respect for the workshops I did at fair and the social teachings, the knowing the period ways to reverence and basic fair speak and such. And to sidetrack just for a second, the reason that a lot of us old fairies are not so happy with the contemporary fairs is because the original fairs that we were weaned on, those Renaissance pleasure fairs, South and North, were run by educators. Phyllis, the original founder, created the fair for children, and she was a school teacher. And the heads of entertainment were teachers of drama departments or professional actors. And we had a basic fair accent pamphlet that we had to study. We had workshops that were very strict. The court members, for example, some would spend thousands of 1970s dollars on their outfits on their own, not of the fair's money. And everyone in those positions had to know about the Earl of Leicester and Essex and Sussex and de Medicis and whoever they were portraying, and everyone played in character all day long, 8 hours of sometimes longer, and the etiquette and so on and so forth. And that has been not so much required of the fairs. Now it's almost a carnival circuit of acts that go from fair to fair.
Oh yeah, no, I mean,
and people who see the amplification with microphones and or food trucks and stuff at fair, it's just when you're used to a certain bar being this high and you're coming in like this, and it's like, where'd it go? But getting back on track, in my film career, as soon as I got out of high school, my parents couldn't tell me what to do anymore, and I jumped into getting on movie sets. I just wanted to get on in at some studios to see what it was like in front of and behind the camera. And I started doing basically background work on films like The Rose with Bette Midler and FM with Martin Mull and company. I Want to Hold Your Hand, directed by Zemeckis, ironically. I was a Ringo fan. And then I got to do some dance moves. I'm in 4 different scenes in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And getting brainwashed by Alice Cooper in this one scene, I did some dance moves that made me eligible to go Screen Actors Guild, which I think it was $350 to join at that point in 77. But I couldn't afford not to pay my rent. So I opted to pay my rent instead of getting my SAG card. But I finally got advice from a casting professional who said, and it was a callback. I had a callback for Brighton Beach Memories. I think that was it. And he said, you got talent, but there's no training on your resume. No one's going to take you seriously unless you get training. So that's why I set my sights on going to the American Conservatory Theater, because I didn't think I could afford Juilliard. And I finally got into ACT and then continued my intermediate studies at San Francisco State, where I got to know Michael McShane, do shows with Michael Colty and Mike McShane. Lots of really great talent that came out of there. And I fell into an opportunity where I screen tested for the lead in a film called War Games, and got a hot agent because of that test. And even though I tested with Ali Sheedy the same day as Eric Stoltz and Dana Carvey and all, I was the only one to come in without an agent. I came in through an open call that they had in 5 different cities. So I was considered a hot item. And I knew I could act. I was juggling at the time 6 different scripts, you know, in my studies. And none of us got the role. I remember of the 6 of us that screen tested, Matthew got it. And ironically, a year later, a buddy of mine said, "Hey, I'm Carl Bressler, who became an agent himself, and after being an actor for many years, he still acts. Mr. Berg is all his characters. He gets the same last name, Mr. Berg." He says, I'm going on this open call. You want to come with me?" And I was like, "No." He says, "Come on, it'll be fun." And I was like, "Oh God." So we went to Warner Brothers and got in this line with 500 other guys to be seen for this film that was then I understood to be a medieval thing. I was like, I could do medieval. And when I got my turn in front of the casting director, she recognized me and she said, "Hey, we know you from the role of Jaime." I forget the role's name in Honky Tonk Man, a Clint Eastwood film. Clint didn't want to hit me in the face apparently with the butt of a rifle, so I didn't get that role. But she said, "You're big in our files. You know, you're not right for this. Thank you." I was like, "Okay." And then the next day, my agent called. So, "What are you doing going on an open call?" I said, "I was keeping my friend company." "Oh, are you sure what happened on War Games wasn't in your mind?" And I was like, "Well, it was in the back of my mind." But she said, "Good, because they now want to read you for the lead in this film with Michelle Pfeiffer and Rutger Hauer." And I was like, "Okay." And she managed to get me the only script available. The director was off in Italy. Richard Donner was scouting locations. And I fell in love with the script. And because of my work in the Renaissance Fair and doing Shakespeare and such, I was like, I can nail this. This is going to be great. And when I finally got into the casting director's office, she asked me what scenes did I like, and I found 19 scenes I loved. She said, "Let's do them all." And I did. And I said, "Can I use these items and my props and so and so?" And when I was done, she said, "I'm going to talk with Dick Donner tonight and tell him about you, and let's see what he says." I was like, "Great." And then I went away out of town, in fact, on vacation in Mexico for a few days with my parents. And when I got back, my agent was screaming, "Where'd you go? I've been trying to get a hold of you." I said, "I told you I was going to Mexico for a few days." And she goes, "Well, they want to screen test you right away." I was like, "What?" And it's the test is on for tomorrow, and I got my time and everything, and I was actually locking my door, heading to the studio an hour early just so I could relax and prep. And the phone rang, and I reopened the door, and it wasn't cell phones yet. This was, I guess, 82, 3, and it was my agent saying the test is off. Matthew Broderick just came down in his price. I have yet to see Lady Hawk. I understand he doesn't use a medieval accent at all, but I only a few years ago brought myself to finally watching War Games, which I thought he did a great job in. And I was pissed though, because in the original script there were a couple scenes that they cut that were very good. There was a scene in the bathroom where some very nasty dialogue took place, and the cops that are taking him get beat up by the local sheriffs. It was really fun. That was his original escape. Anyway, so yes, I have used what I've got from fairs in my film work somewhat, but also very much in between film work and television work. I use that immersive training. I do living history now at Columbia State Historic Park, where I'm a certified docent, and I'll do town tours as Mark Twain, or I will play a flim flam snake oil salesman, and I train now volunteers for big events like the 1852 Diggins. I just last week had a training with 40 volunteers, training them what I learned from fair on how to work immersively, environmentally, and create a history for your character, and use props and bits and things in your pocket that you can fall back on when you can't think of anything else, or your improv is failing you, or so I just adore that connection, and I have to work. I find I can't retire. I'm compelled. I'm passionate about acting, storytelling, and helping others. I teach, I mentor, and it's incredibly rewarding to see kids that I've trained to work in living history or in shows find their way through this crazy entertainment world.
Yeah.
And I've had a number of them be very successful. Very delighted about that. Knock on wood.
So let's talk about, what was your biggest break? Like when did your break happen? Like your big film break? What would you say your film break would be?
After having to move back to LA, I fell in love with San Francisco and the Bay Area.
Yeah.
When I moved up to go to ACT, and I was pretty determined I would never leave. But sure enough, because I got the hot agent having screen tested for War Games, she said, you have to move back to LA. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? So I did. And it took me a while to find my way. I had a lot of doors open to me, luckily. And about 3 months after moving there, I had a really lovely interview with George Miller, the director of Mad Max and those films, and the Babe and Lorenzo's Oil, and a lot of great films. And George, it was his first film project in Hollywood. And he was just like me at the time. I was just like loving it, and seeing the starlets and the guys working, and the just being immersed in a working studio was thrilling for him, and I shared that. And my audition for him was really to tell a joke, and I told a couple jokes that he liked and the casting people liked, and so I got cast in Twilight Zone movie. Ironically, I was not really wanting to work on it because of the accident that had taken place 3 months previous. But Spielberg decided that he had enough of the film in the can to finish it, and the other directors lined up and everything in pre-production going, so he wanted to finish it. And luckily, that cloud and taint didn't affect our set too much, and everyone did their job. And I got to I adored being immersed in the many different aspects of the production. Often Alan Davio, the cinematographer who just unfortunately passed during the pandemic from COVID. He would put the camera where my character was sitting. So I'd go in the back of the plane and hang out with these extras in it. And I'm realizing I'm with some very interesting people. There was a guy with a giant mohawk named Spaz Attack, who was with Tony Basil and David Bowie on Saturday Night Live, and he was telling me how he had just done this incredible fight scene with Harrison Ford in a film called Blade Runner. And, you know, I was like, wow. And then this other guy, old guy, telling stories about his brother, Milton Berle, being kidnapped at gunpoint by Al Capone because he wanted him to play his nightclub in Chicago. And Milton said, no, no, no. And at the airport, he got kidnapped. Anyway, just really lovely there, that type of thing. And then I would go pick the brain of, when they were not working, of the crew. I just adored watching Alan Davio work, and George Miller was beside himself because this was one of the first times ever that they had been able to put a video tap to a monitor on the lens of the camera, and he could see what was on the camera, and he was just delighted. But you could see what the cinematographer was seeing. And then additionally, Garrett Brown was there working with his very early Steadicam. At that point, I think the Steadicam weighed 65 pounds.
Yeah,
And
it had just got invented for what, Halloween? Like it had just got invented for Halloween, the film. And Twilight is one of my favorite films. Okay, so we're gonna kind of, because this is actually a good segue. I'm gonna switch into kind of how you have impacted me throughout my life, moving into everything. So like Twilight, when I was growing up, was one of the films that I would put on television, like the VHS, and watch constantly as a child.
Twilight Zone.
Twilight Zone. Yeah, Twilight. Yeah. I forget there's vampires and werewolves now. Twilight Zone. Yeah, I mean, and I would watch that like religiously. And you're in the very famous airplane sequence of that's a very famous sequence of the film, and that was something that I love. All the expressions, every actor. There's so many good actors in just every aspect of each story of Twilight Zone.
The ensemble that I was part of was really a thrill, and I got to be very friendly with John Lithgow, and he was delighted in that he was told for the first time in his film work to do the opposite of what he's usually told. He's usually told, bring it in, John. He's a big man, and he was weaned on stage, you know, but bring it in. Camera's picking up everything, and you're going to be. Instead, George was like, bigger, bigger, and he loved that.
Yeah, and that sequence, that film, like overall huge impact in my life. Just I love anthology horror because of Twilight Zone and Outer Limits and Night Gallery and those real and Night Gallery, the television show, is some really good acting work too. Like people don't realize how much amazing work was done in those anthology shows, because they go, oh, it's just an anthology show. It's just like, you know, it's a quick little thing. And I'm like, no, it's like hundreds of amazing shorts. Like, and some
a lot of great talent. A lot of folk who in front of and behind the cameras were, you know, working on their careers and have gone on to incredible, fantastic heights.
So Twilight Zone, what happens next?
Then I got a small scene in a film called Crackers that Louis Malle directed. And my scene was with Sean Penn, and you know, Sean went to Santa Monica High School, so we had something to talk about, and I got kind of into Sean's head a bit because I think because Sean is very much of the method and school of acting. If the character isn't close enough to him, he stays in that character to maintain that integrity. And I remember hanging in his dressing room saying, Sean, you can lose the Texan accent. You know, I'm just Jeffrey here, you know, and he did drop it for a minute, but nonetheless, it was very funny because I went to San Francisco to shoot the scene, and I had a good buddy. In fact, my friend who went with me to the original cattle call for War Games, Lincoln, his dad, Alan Meyerson, had directed Donald Sutherland in Steelyard Blues. And I started working with Alan's wife in doing looping about that time. And that's voices for people on screen that are not mic'd, for people who don't know what looping is. So I sort of had an icebreaker with Donald Sutherland, who also starred in the film with a great cast ensemble in that one. And I said, you know, Alan says hi, and Donald was like, oh my God. So I got to, you know, kind of a way in. I love to find a way in to ingratiate and become close to the talent I'm working with as soon as possible. And it was really great. I though, you know, spent, I guess, a couple of weeks waiting for my scene to be shot in San Francisco, but it kept raining. So they kept going to do interiors, and mine was an exterior. They didn't want it in the rain. And I was like, I want to work with Sven Nykvist here. Come on. And eventually they said, just go back to LA. We'll call you when we're ready to shoot your scene. So I guess that was probably late October, November. And in January, I got the call, we're going to shoot your scene, go to report to Universal. And I show up to shoot my scene, and it's raining. They're making it rain.
That's because all the other scenes they had to film with rain and continuity happened, right? It's like,
And then they cut my line. I was like, oh, well. But nonetheless, it's wonderful and an honor to have on my resume that I worked in a Louis Malle film. It's just thrilling for me. And being able to see Wallace Shawn, who was hot at the time for My Dinner with Andre, and just a really great cast there. And then shortly after, what did I get next? I think it was work on Johnny Dangerously with Michael Keaton.
okay.
Which has become a cult classic.
Yeah.
I'll put a picture of me up on my social network as, you know, the I Heart Johnny t-shirt salesman. And people just out of the woodwork, that's my favorite film. And they start quoting all the funny lines from it. It's just delightful. And one of the irony is, you know, as an actor, parts don't come hot and heavy usually right away, unless you're really lucky or you've got a great agent and connections. So I you know, did everything in between, valet parking and a chef and a cook and a waiter. And I was doing some catering, and the company I worked for actually catered the wrap party for Johnny Dangerously. And I remember I was serving drinks to Amy Heckerling, the director, and Michael Keaton. And Michael looked at me, and then he looked at Amy and says, well, wasn't he in the film? I was like, yes. And I loved it that at the wrap party, they showed all the cut musical numbers. There were several musical numbers. I think all were cut, but Mary Lou Henner's. So a lot of people don't know that I guess it was going to be a musical.
Yeah, I was like, I did not even know that was a musical.
And another opportunity that I you know, take the risk. What are you going to lose? I knocked on Joe Piscopo's door, dressing room, and he said, "Come in." I was like, "Okay, hi, I'm Mr. Piscopo. I'm just working today with the scene with the Pope. Dom DeLuise is the Pope, and I wanted to say hello because I'm a big fan of your work on Saturday Night Live, etc." And he says, "Sit down, let's talk." So I got to just sit and chat for an hour. It was just lovely to see how much he just loved working on films and his joy and passion. I think that's, you know, to tie in with your theme here, is the passion that I see in people in the industry. That is inspiring. And I was thinking and discussing with my wife earlier about passion in general, how sometimes passion can be too much.
Mm-hmm.
It could be passionate, but in the angry sense, and or the spark of passion that makes you too much for people to take. And I remember friends who were incredibly passionate and fantastic talents become too much for themselves, that they actually overload because they can't either control or rein them in or what have you, and they'll go on emotional leveling medications, and it's heartbreaking to see that spark is deadened but I also understand that because of their wiring, it's getting the best of them or making them alienated by their family, or I don't know. Anyway, the passion's a very big topic for a show. So
Well, yeah, and I also think that, and this also goes into passion for me. Like, for example, like we both worked in the Renaissance Fair, obviously different aspects of it and different decades. Like when I was, you were still working Renaissance Fair, but when I was running Renaissance Fair, I don't work at the, I should disclosure, I do not work or run any Renaissance Fairs any longer. I also too have the feeling that some of the original magic was lost. I mean, I'm an acting teacher, I'm a theater teacher, I'm a director. That's what I do at heart. And so yeah, I just felt like some of that was being lost. And when I started seeing the money for the homegrown stuff to be left away, that was kind of my time to go. But I think that passion also is one of the things that has always kept me going, in the fact that I left the Renaissance Fair, but I still continued to create, and now I do film and stuff like that. By the way, I used to say I would never do films for hacks. I'm only a theater person. Now here I am, like film is pretty much what I'm known for, but which is just hilarious. But you Twilight Zone, these other roles, and now you are getting kind of a name for yourself as a character actor, and you get an interesting call, right? And I hear the story that I've heard, and you tell me if this is incorrect, is you are going into an audition thinking you're going to be a stand-in. Oh, yeah, there we are. Yeah, that's look. I'm so much thinner now. This is Carnaval Fantastico, which was an Italian Renaissance fair, which I was the theatrical director for. And this is when we actually got to meet. And it was so funny because as a child, not only did I love Twilight Zone, my favorite part of a movie, just part of a movie, like segment of a movie, was when you come in Back to the Future 2, upside down as George McFly. And my Uncle Russell, huge sci-fi fan, bought me the VHS, and I wore out that part on the VHS so bad that the tape snapped, and they would have to continuously get me one. So not only when I saw you in Young Frankenstein, but when I got to meet you, it was the first time, you're gonna laugh, it was the first time for me that I got starstruck. And it was kind of almost, I was like, how do I introduce myself? How do I talk to this person? Because you were, and Back to the Future 3 is one of my favorite movies of all time. So like you were just so quintessentially a part of my life without being directly a part of my life, that meeting you was so crazy. And then when I joined the Renaissance Fair, mind you, I was 12 when I saw you. I think I was in Black Point. At some point you were in a show, and I remember seeing Sandy Grimm was also in a couple shows at Black Point. And there's so much inspiration. Commedia dell'arte I remember going, let's see, yep, there you are. This iconically is like forever ingrained in my mind. And this to me was movie magic. Like this, and my sister loved this movie too. So we just loved this part. But yes, so and then Commedia dell'arte was a huge thing that we connected on, because that's what I ended up specializing in, was Commedia dell'arte and Renaissance theater and Shakespeare. And so there was just so many connections that when I got to meet you, I was just so nervous. But the story that I've heard about this famous iconic role is that you were told that you were going to be a stand-in, that you were auditioning kind of for like a stand-in.
Yeah, well, if you remember Cock and Feathers, Jeffrey Breyer,
yes,
one of the original members, had started a look-alike company called Marvel Entertainment, and he already was playing Stanley Laurel, and called me up one day and said, Jeffrey, have you ever played Stan Laurel? And I was in between work and needing work, and I said, no, but what do you got? And he said, my Oliver Hardy partner lost his partner up at Universal Studios tour. Would you be interested? And I said, yeah, let me go up. And I didn't know really, I remember watching Laurel and Hardy as a kid, but I didn't retain, I wasn't close enough paying attention to do an accurate impression. But I tried being silly, and my bowler hat wasn't right, and so on and so forth. But the meeting with the powers that be there, the manager and the actor playing Ollie, the actor knew me from a production I had played Mercutio in, Romeo and Juliet in Hollywood. He said, this guy's got talent, I'll train him. Because the manager was going, oh, this guy, I don't see it, you know. And so within a couple of weeks, I was doing a passable Stanley Laurel impression. And a year later, I put together playing Chaplin, a year after that playing Groucho. And in 88, Breyer called me up and he said, do you by chance know who Crispin Glover is? I said, yes, of course I do. He and I worked on a film together at the American Film Institute with Dan O'Herlihy in 83, I think it was, and a year before he got the first Back to the Future film. And I remember when Crispin, when going to see Back to the Future, I was specifically going there to see what the competition was, because I was coming out that summer co-starring with Clint Eastwood in Pale Rider. Mm-hmm. And I was already a fan of Mike Fox and Chris Lloyd. I thought Leah Thompson was great. And when Crispin came on and was doing his thing, and Tom for that matter, I thought they were fantastic. They were just, and it was no surprise that became the highest grossing film of 1985. So flashback to 88, when Breyer asked if I knew who Crispin was, I said, what's going on? He says, well, they're looking for a photo double for him. I said, for the Back to the Future sequels? He goes, I'm not at liberty to say. I was like, come on. It's all over Variety and Hollywood Reporter that they're calling it Back to the Bank, because they paid everyone millions, you know. Yeah. Mike Fox was getting 6 million or something. Anyway, I said, get me in there. I need the work. My second son was on the way. I needed to qualify for my medical coverage, for God's sake. So I went and met with the assistant directors, and I said, you know, I did this film with Clint Eastwood. I guest starred on Scarecrow and Mrs. King and various other TV shows and so on and so forth. And they said, great. And then they apparently talked with Zemeckis about me. And then I was sent to casting, where I did the scene with Marty hanging the laundry from the first film. Mm-hmm. And I guess, was it Judy Taylor, Mike Fenton? The casting directors liked my work there, and I started getting sent to prosthetic makeup fittings and body cast fittings for special effects. And then I was asked to screen test in the young George makeup. And I was like, wow, they must, you know, are doing some time travel thing where they need George from these different time periods, you know, simultaneously. So let me show you what that makeup looks like, because it's kind of good.
I also think that it's interesting that they made you read the famous scene that he was kicked off set for.
Who was kicked off set?
Crispin and the director, Zemeckis. Didn't they fight on the laundry scene on the first movie?
Gosh, I didn't hear that story.
Yeah. I'm a huge Back to the Future nerd. So Crispin wanted to do the scene a little bit more actory, and Zemeckis was not agreeing with him. And they got in a huge argument during the hanging of the laundry scene when they filmed it on the first set. And Zemeckis is known for saying that was a moment he said he never wanted to work with him.
Oh no. Well,
so I just think it's interesting that they're screen testing you with that scene.
Well, no, the screen they auditioned me in the office with that scene. The screen test was for this makeup.
Yeah.
So as you can see here, the profile, it is obviously based on Crispin's life mask.
Mm-hmm.
So I did the screen test, and Zemeckis asked Dean Cundy, the cinematographer, "What do you think, Dean?" And Dean said, "I think we have Crispin without the trouble." At that point, I was like, that doesn't sound right. And I called Crispin, and I didn't speak with him. I left him a message. I said, "What's going on? Can you say a good word for me to be your photo double? I need the work." And I was told by my makeup artist, Ken Chase, the designer originally who got fired just before we got into shooting, that I was going to be George, that Crispin was out. And I was like, well, that's not right. How are they going to do that? But nonetheless, I wasn't in a position where I wanted to turn down work. And I figured they must have paid Crispin for use of his likeness. Universal paid, I don't know, 20 grand a year for Laurel and Hardy, and another probably 20 grand for Groucho and Chaplin, and probably more than that for Marilyn Monroe and Lassie. They paid for the use of Lassie the dog, licensing. So I did my job. I remember some uncomfortable moments in that young George makeup when we're recreating the Enchantment Under the Sea dance, of Mike Fox going, "Oh, Crispin ain't gonna like this," or being referred to as Crispin was really odd. And I even said to Zemeckis, "Can you call me Jeffrey?" So we recreated the fight in the parking lot, and the kiss at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. And I tell you, there's still 30% of the people out there who don't realize it's a different actor, because they cut my work in with close-ups of Crispin.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was hung upside down, as you know, for better part of 2 weeks to do the 2015 from outside the front door through the living room and into the kitchen, with the special effect on the wall that had the projection and the pizza and all that good stuff. And body cast was for a bit where I rotated my axis for pizza. So if you haven't seen that, go to the bonus material on part 2 called Pizza. And I got to do a lot of, not a lot, but some improv. I got, How's Granddad's Little Pumpkin came from my head hanging upside down the same level as Michael J. Fox's Marlene. They put her in these hot pants that were orange and patted the butt a little, and I thought it looked like a pumpkin. So they let me improvise that, and then fruit, please. I give your granddad a piece of fruit, Lorraine says, and Marlene hands me a banana, and I try to eat the banana upside down with the peel slapping me in the face. And it was a very funny bit, and I thought Zemeckis liked it, but it didn't stay in. But I do have the still. If you're good to me, I'll send you a signed still from that deleted scene. Anyway, so when part 3 finally came out, and a year later, I shot that scene outside the McFly home where George is looking for his glasses and Marty's coming back from the Old West. And that's the only scene I'm in. Bob Gale promised me, he said, "We'll find you a part in part 3 without the makeup, so you can use your own face," which never materialized. But I think he got angry at me. He and Neil Canton came rushing at me saying, "What are you doing talking to the director about your billing?" I said, "Well, my agent screwed up and said, in title billing, that'd be a step back in my career. Zemeckis agreed to give me a shared title card." "Well, you never talked to the director about it." I said, "Well, it had to be handled." Anyway, so that's why I get the 6th billing in the title cards at the beginning of the film. So it wasn't until part 3 came out that Crispin called me back and said, "It wasn't fair what they did." And I said, "What did they do?" And he said that they spliced his close-ups with my work, and we're only going to pay him, I think, scale plus half or something like this. And I said, "Well, that's not right. Didn't they pay you for the use of your life mask and the makeup?" And no, they didn't. And so I was at that point really kind of upset, because I had run into a brick wall trying to get my photos from production, and also mysteriously a promo tour that I was going to do for Universal Florida, the brand new park opening there, it was a 10-city mall tour, and all of a sudden the plug got pulled on it because I was going to be also promoting my participation in Back to the Future Part 2. So things were sinisterly, mysteriously fucked up. Sorry if
Well, no, we cuss all the time on the show. What I was going to say is,
yeah,
the interesting thing about that is because the parallel to what we are now seeing today in the artificial aspect of being able to have an actor stand in with some green dots and then digitally recreate another actor. I mean, if Back to the Future was today, they would not have used you. They wouldn't. They would have.
That's right. Probably wouldn't have had to, but they would have had to get the previous actor's permission. And that has always been the case, at least with when reuse of a likeness, if they're not living, they go to the estate and get an agreement.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure that that will hold, that the Screen Actors Guild has started making inroads to getting that language into all contracts. That's what the part of this last contract strike was about. And it's very interesting because your IMDb goes lower the more popular you are. Mm-hmm. And just a couple of weeks ago, because of the AI controversy and so on and so forth, this whole thing has come back to life because I'm in the middle of this case that is an example of how AI could be abused. Even though we didn't use AI, it was all makeup effects.
Yes.
I think we had a computer program running the track that the camera, the VistaVision was on, but there was very little CGI. I mean, there was some in the flying cars and such, but nonetheless, so because of that resurgence of my work in 2 and 3 has come, people are going to look me up. Oh, who's the guy? Who's really Crispin or George in this? And so my numbers finally have gotten, I guess I'm in the top 600 or 700 actors in the world.
Which is weird because Pale Rider is such a freaking good movie. Like, that's the thing that's weird to me, is Pale Rider is such a good movie that I think that people wouldn't that rate, like, I'm surprised that me and your IMB number is closer together than I would have expected, because I'm in the low 100,000s.
Oh, you're in the low 100,000. Well, I'm up to 630. Well, I think I'm back to 12,000 now. But nonetheless, the Pale Rider, which was so much fun to work on, just doing a Western with Clint, what a dream. That was another one example of me being in the right place at the right time, lucky. And as Don Adams told my dad at his club, when my dad asked for acting advice for his son, Don Adams, get smart, said, Wally, tell him to forget about it. It's 10% luck and 90% who you know. No, it's 10% talent and 90% luck. That's what he said. Anyway, Chris Penn had met Clint Eastwood, Sean Penn's brother, Christopher, mm-hmm. had met Clint and said, I want to do a movie with you. You got a Western or something? Clint sent him Pale Rider and offered him the part of Eddie Conway, Spider's son. And Chris threw it back and said, I don't want to play a good guy. I want to play a bad guy. And, Reservoir Dogs, whatever. And Clint then moved him into LaHood's son, which is a terrible boy. And the actor who was playing Teddy Conway, Chuck LaFont, was moved into Eddie. And my agent just luckily at the right time asked the casting director of Warner Brothers, you got anything that's not in the breakdowns that, I should know about? I might have a client for. And they described my character and they said, we got files that we'll be able to fill this. She goes, but that's perfect for one of my clients. And she sent me in. I knew I was going to have to cry on cue. And I studied the method, sense memory, emotional recall. I studied fantasy charging and
group theater stuff. You studied everything the group theater taught.
Yeah, I tried to, dip my toe in the waters of different techniques, and I didn't want to leave anything to chance. I had a lock of my grandmother's hair in my pocket, who was like the only one in my family who said, "Darling, if it's what you want to do, you do it." And I was like, so I knew I had done my homework, and when I was put on tape by the producer Fritz Mans, and it sent to Clint, I had no need for the lock of hair in my pocket or my. I think I used fantasy charging, and I cried on cue, during the scene, and that was on Friday. Monday, I was on the plane going to Ketchum Valley, Idaho, to shoot for 5 weeks. So yeah, Pale Rider was not a large part. And in fact, I did a lot of bits. I made it, my character was kind of not a half wit, but a quarter wit. And whenever he got excited, he'd fall on his ass. So at the end of many scenes, I just fall down on my butt. And Clint thought that was amusing, but he didn't use any of it.
Oh, wow.
But it has, lasted. Pale Rider was the highest grossing Western of the 1980s.
Yeah. That's why it always surprises me that, yeah. Yeah, well, that's the story of character actors usually. So Jeffrey, now you have gotten into something that everyone's really big into now. It's the cons. You are at a lot of Comic Cons and a lot of like you make a lot of appearances at so what is how's that culture?
I haven't done one this year. No, I did one. I did the East Bay Comic Con this year.
Okay.
In the rain, people came out still. That was really nice. Most of them were fair people, came to see me. Say hi.
Where was that held at? At the East Bay?
Oakland.
In Oakland? Okay.
Yeah. So no, Concord. Was it Concord? Anyway, it was in the East Bay. I did the first one in 2008. The Hollywood show brought in cast and crew of the Back to the Future trilogy. I think there were 24 of us.
Wow.
And it was the first time any of us had seen each other since filming. And I had seen, I believe I'd seen Wendy Jo Sperber before that, because Claudia Wells, who played Jennifer in the first film, and I were invited to come to one of her fundraiser golf tournaments for her We Spark Cancer Support Center. And that was really great to see Wendy, and before she unfortunately passed, who played Linda McFly. But here at the Hollywood show, there was Chris and Leah and a bunch of the support players and crew. And that was really cool. And Mike happened to be on tour in Los Angeles that weekend promoting his new book, and he showed up unannounced. So as soon as he got there, Mark McClure and Francis Lee McCain, James Tolkien, Christopher Lloyd, and Leah Thompson, and myself all went and spent about 20 minutes with Mike, just like spending time with him. Yeah. And it was, I think, the first time any of us had seen how the Parkinson's was ravaging him. He was still Mike. He's a brilliant, funny, witty, just wonderful dynamo. And yet at times you would see the pain make him move and have to walk away because the Parkinson's was doing its thing to him. But he was still feisty and fun, and it was a really lovely visit. And when we were finished with Mike, we all said, bye, we're going to lunch. And we left Mike with a group of 500 fans who were ready to devour him. And that was really sweet, because Mike showed up unannounced. That was a real treat for a lot of those people who will never forget that day. So that was 2008. And then slowly thereafter, I would be invited to screenings at theaters. I remember the first time I finally got Chris Lloyd to talk more than a few words, where he and I were stuffed into a projectionist booth at the New Beverly Cinema for a trilogy screening. And we were in there for about 40 minutes. And that's where I really got him to open up and chat. And it was really lovely. And where basically became friends at that point. We had met at the reunion, but didn't really have time to talk. And I asked my makeup artist, Mike Mills, on while we were shooting to introduce me to Chris because I was such a big fan. And he said, come out to Hill Valley 2015 exterior when we're shooting next week about 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. I'll introduce you. So I only got to meet Chris when we did the makeup trailer at 4 in the morning. And it was Mike said, Chris, this is Jeffrey. He's playing George. And Jeffrey and this Chris. And it was shaking hands. And it's a real honor. Nice to meet you. And that was it. It was just awkwardness for a while. So that was what, 88. So finally in 2009 or so, we're in this projectionist booth and we really got some time together. And I have done a few shows with him in London at the Comic-Con there, and in New Jersey at the Chiller show. Learned that Chris likes exotic plants. So when he was being feted in the North Bay at the Sonoma County Film Festival, my wife actually ran out to California Carnivores and came back with this rare B-52 bomber Venus flytrap that I presented to Chris while he's being feted. They were showing a montage of his film. I was like, Chris, here, this is for you. He was like, oh my God. Oh! And next time I saw him a couple years later, I was like, Chris, how's that flytrap doing? He said, I killed it. I'm never home to water it. Anyway, he was a lovely man. And I think the thrill for me, because I wasn't allowed to promote myself, and I wasn't able to use those films as a catalyst to further my career. In fact, it was in a way steps back because of the Michigas from Universal. I think that because the real fans that have discovered me and brought me to these shows have really turned out, and a lot of them are friends. I have luckily people now all over the world, from the Tokyo fan club to the Dutch, and I had Russian friends come on the Back to the Future cruise that I co-produced to raise money for Mike's charity back in 2015. You know, it's been really fun to see them show up. I've helped with the Back to 1885 3 times as a guest, and this last one co-produced. And now that the original producers are retired, I'm hoping to bring it back as Return to Hill Valley, where we celebrate Back to the Future Part 3, where it was shot. And
cool.
You know, hopefully the fans will come and get their picture taken with the number 3 locomotive that was, you know, the train that Doc and Marty hijack. And it's a fundraiser for Mike's charity, and that's, after all, it's really a lot about Mike. You know, he really made those films cohesive what they were. It wasn't going to be the same film at all with Eric Stoltz. And I think, you know, Chris Lloyd originally threw the script of Back to the Future in the trash when Universal sent it to him. And his girlfriend at the time, unbeknownst to him, had pulled it out of the trash. But he didn't want to do any Hollywood work. He wanted to do stage because that's what he was weaned on and what he loved. So he was doing a show with Colleen Dewhurst, and apparently she got ill. The show kept getting postponed and postponed month after month. And he was like, my God, what are we going to do? And the girlfriend presented that script. In the meantime, Universal was looking to all sorts of different actors. Jeff Goldblum, John Lithgow turned it down because he wanted to take a couple of years off to be with the kids. Dudley Moore. There were a lot of Bill Cosby. There were a lot of different considerations for Doc Brown. You have the book that Michael Klastrin put together. You'll see some of the casting notes. It's fascinating, really fun.
Yeah,
Ralph Macchio turned down Marty.
I did know that. I did know that. It's funny because the 80s and the early 90s are in a resurgence. And so like a lot of this stuff is coming back into, and also with the musical, Back to the Future musical that is now on Broadway, like so many people are finding the trilogy again. I know that there's a lot of talks of.
The first time I saw the musical, it was performed a high school drama teacher in Ohio wrote Back to the Future as a musical and performed it for Chris Lloyd, myself, Harry Waters Jr., Bob Gale, and I think Claudia Wells was there too. And we lost it. It was so fantastic. It was at a DeLorean owners convention. And most of these kids had already graduated and they came back during this summer to perform the musical that their teacher had written. And you could see the light go off above Bob Gale's head. It's like, this is fire. This is brilliant. And so he got all the right original writers on board and created the musical that tested in Manchester. And I got to see it in London about 2 years ago.
When it opened on the West End, yeah.
And it was fantastic. It was totally thrilling. It was a lot of fun.
I have not seen it yet. I want to see it, so I think it's coming to Vegas sometime.
Oh yeah, it's gonna road tour forever.
So I will definitely be watching that. Now, we're getting close to the end of our show today, but I know I'm like, with me and you could talk for hours.
The passion isn't running out.
But my biggest question for you would be, what do you have coming next? Like, what, like, are you I know you did a Mark Twain film. How's that? Like, is that coming out? Is that at film festivals? What's going on with that?
Came out that we actually shot that. Oh boy, more than 15 years ago. It was called Mark Twain's. No, it's called Dreamland. Mark Twain in Jerusalem. It was originally called Mark Twain Adventures in the Holy Land, based on his trip on the first commercial cruise line out of New York, where he got 5 different newspapers to sponsor his $2,000 ticket, where he'd write every week letters explaining where they were and describing. It was like a travel log in these newspapers. When he got back from the trip to Europe and the Holy Land, he bought all those letters back and formed his first book, The Innocents Abroad. And I auditioned for Twain and got the part, and we shot in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And then I got to go with a skeleton crew to Israel and shoot these amazing ungettable scenes at the Damascus Gate and the Wailing Wall and at Jesus' tomb. And you should, I'll send you a link to my journey to Mark Twain video I did for the Mark Twain Center for Studies, the Center for Mark Twain Studies in Elmira, where he spent his summers writing. They had me on during the pandemic, and I think it came out great. So I'll send it to you if you're interested in seeing it.
Oh yeah, for sure. I love Mark Twain.
So that film got picked up by PBS, and Martin Sheen ended up narrating it. They originally wanted Robin Williams to narrate it. And it was really thrilling for me because I had never played Twain, and I had to be a quick study and put them together, and did a passable Twain, I think. And then doing living history as Twain, I've played him at various living history events now. I even had Twain come to the Dickens Fair one year. It was kind of thrilling. But more recently, I've been working, I recently played Professor Moriarty in a new Sherlock Holmes short story that is a fundraiser for the 221B Baker Street Holmesian Scholars Center in Jackson, California, that got evicted, and they're trying to raise money to move into their new place. And then I'm working on a fan film, which is a mashup of Back to the Future, American Graffiti, Men in Black, and Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Okay.
Which is called Back to Graffiti. And I've shot 4 days on that, and I think I've got a 5th or 6th coming up. And that is like a director's proof that he can direct, you know, a
proof of concept.
Well, more than a proof of concept, he just was a show because he's a comic book and graphic artist, and he wants to move into film. So he's showing his prowess. And so we'll be wrapping that soon. And then I recently shot a couple scenes with Billy Baldwin here on a film called No Address, which is the production, which is, this is, you never hear of this, but the production is giving 50% of its profits to homeless charities.
So I did not know you were a part of this film. However, I have heard about this film, and because it's about unhoused people, unhoused humans,
Homeless. Yeah.
the homeless, and since I do a lot of activism work and I run 2 film festivals, that was that has been in my surface of things that I've been looking at, and that's hilarious that you're see so many different connections. It's just it is a very small community. Now, I have loved every minute of talking to you, but we have went for an hour and a half, and I think if we go any further, our listeners just won't listen, which means that I'm gonna have to have you back again at some point, because I would like to talk about, there's so much I want to talk about Shakespeare with you. I want to talk about Commedia with you. I want, like, there's just so many different things, and storytelling. Me and you have so much passion, that we can talk about a lot of different things. But if you were to give one piece of advice to any human right now who wants to get into acting or get into the art world or follow their passion, what would your piece of advice be?
Oh, it's, what George Clooney said, don't mix grain and grape. No, the same advice that I got, luckily, is get training. If you're passionate, you have to do it. It's not a career that you can necessarily make a living at, but if you have to do it, get training so it shows that you're taking it seriously. Don't give up, persevere, and keep it in your heart, and you will be successful. Keep a journal of who you've met that are determined and focused so you can stay in touch. Keep another journal for your creative, your development, and then put your own crew together when you have a story that you're perfect for that needs to be told, and you'll have your own calling card. There's a lot of great advice. The Bryan Cranston has this wonderful bit. You can look him up on YouTube. His advice to actors is you don't go in to perform, you go in to just do your job, which is to tell the story, immerse it, get in, be brilliant, get out, and forget about it.
Yeah.
And then he said once he got that, he hasn't looked back. He's been working ever since.
I agree. And I agree on finding a crew and finding and telling a story. Do it. I mean, like, obviously that's what I did with Last Gasp, and now I've won the Jersey Film Festival, a bunch of different stuff. I'm working on a feature film right now, and hopefully we'll get some funding.
Hey, why am I not in your film?
That's because most of my films have too many young. I don't have older cast members, and that's actually what a lot of my friends. Because I'm also friends with gosh, yeah, I'm horrible at names. I am friends with one of the guys from Parks and Rec, and he's like, Robert, why don't you write, 50-year-old characters, 60-year-old characters? And I'm like, because I like, it's hard for me to like relate. He goes, but if you did, do you know how many famous friends would come and do your films? And I go, you know what, that's kind of true, because all my friends are way older than me. So like yeah. I'm looking into it. I'm definitely looking into wanting to do more, because I would love to work with you in the film world, because we've really only got to do the interactive, immersive stuff. And I mean, I'm coming from the fair world. I played Edward de Vere for 10 years. That's draining. Like being the 17th Earl of Oxford, or Shakespeare in many people's minds, it was not easy. It's draining. So there's so much that we could do outside of that. But again, it has been great to have you, Jeffrey. Thank you everyone who watched. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and follow, and go follow Jeffrey on his socials as well. Oh, and take a look at both our IMDb pages, because that helps our scores go down. Have a great one. And this has been Pagan's Passionate People.
Thank you, Robert.